I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, the anniversary of the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh. On the morning of October 27, 2018, 3 years ago, the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in the United States took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That day, during Shabbat services, a murderer monster, whose name is not even worth mentioning, entered the synagogue yelling, "All Jews must die." Then he opened fire upon the congregants. He arrived armed with an assault rifle and several handguns and brutally and cruelly took the lives of 11 innocent people, wounding 6 others, just for being Jewish. He later told police he wanted all Jews to die and that Jews were committing genocide against his people. My guest today is a very special one. His name is Zack Singerman. Zack is an 11th grader at Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School in the Washington, D.C. area. The Tree of Life massacre was personal for him, as it is his grandmother's congregation. She, thankfully, was not there on that horrible day, but she did lose a close friend. Zack was shaken by the massacre, but he rose to the occasion and was inspired as a result to take a stand already at this young age against anti-Semitism. He decided to found Gen Z Jews Fighting Anti-Semitism, whose mission is to provide a forum for Gen Z to get involved and become educated on the issues and learn advocacy. Zack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Shahar, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
So let's jump right to it. My first question to you is about your personal experience. We are commemorating the Tree of Life massacre, that horrible anti-Semitic event that took the lives of innocent people, as I mentioned. Where were you? I mean, you're young now, you were younger then. Where were you when you heard the news? How did it make you feel? Take us through that experience of yours.
So on that day, I was at my dad's house and my mom comes over and she's in tears. And I didn't really know why. So, because I'd never seen my mom cry before, really. And she told me that there was a shooting at Grandma's synagogue. And when I first heard that, I was kind of shell-shocked because you hear about these different shootings like the Parkland massacre or shootings in Texas or California, places like that. And you feel kind of distant from that because you don't really know people there. And you know that it hurts you because you know that there's a danger, but you never really feel it. And when it came to my grandma being in danger, it was jarring. And I didn't know what to do. And luckily, as you said earlier, she wasn't there that day, but she lost a friend, another was shot. And it was a really scary and confusing time. And once I kind of understood what had happened, I realized that that's the world I'm going to be growing up in, where there's going to be...
Before we jump to that follow-up, I just want to pause on one thing here. Let's talk about being Jewish. Up to that point, I mean, and did you understand what anti-Semitism was at the moment of the attack, and what was being Jewish? What did it mean to you before the attack transpired? How did that manifest itself in your life, Zack?
So, ever since kindergarten, I've been going to a Jewish day school, and I'd always been Jewish. I'd been learning about the Torah and just getting really into the Tanakh, like the Nevi'im part of it and Ketuvim. And I was growing as a Jew and becoming more Jewish, but it had never really defined me before the Tree of Life shooting. After the Tree of Life shooting, I knew that I was Jewish. I knew, I understood the history of attacks on Jews, and I understood how personal they are and how important and scary those actually are.
Before the attack, did you know or were you aware of anti-Semitism?
I don't think I was. I knew that there were people who didn't like Jews, but it never really came to me that there were people who wanted to actively kill us. And it was kind of like a door being opened to a scary world.
So now that moment happens and mom comes through the door crying and you're worried about grandma, and thank God she wasn't there. At what point did you find out that she wasn't there?
My grandma texted my mom, I wasn't there. And so we were like, thank God, like she was out helping campaign for like an election, because it was like election season.
Right.
And luckily she wasn't there, but we didn't even know like the aftermath until a few days later, like how many people died or who.
How did she describe, did you speak to her afterwards with your grandmother?
So that same year I had Thanksgiving with my grandma and some family friends, and we discussed it, and it was very interesting to see how my grandma, who like was born, I believe, a little bit before the Holocaust, so she was younger than 10 years old during the Holocaust, and she didn't understand it, but she'd seen kind of the buildup back to this level of anti-Semitism where people will just beat up and kill Jews. And at that table, actually, at that Thanksgiving table, there was also a family who went to the synagogue, and one of them vividly remembered like hearing about the Holocaust in America, and he started crying at the Thanksgiving table because he couldn't believe that this was happening again, like so many years later.
It's very tragically appropriate when we hear your description of your grandmother, who is going through a life cycle as a child to live through the Holocaust, humanity's most the most, the lowest moral abyss that humanity could ever has ever experienced. And then in the course of not too many years after, we see the signs of the same hatred, the same very this virus with a stamina that refuses to leave this world. And it hits the synagogue where she goes, with her friends, and then her grandson must, live in the world that has the same kind of, evil, still very much alive amongst us. So what happens at that moment? At what point did you decide you're not just gonna complain or keep quiet, you're gonna do something about it?
I think very soon after that Thanksgiving meal, I kind of realized that this was a world that I was going to be growing up in. And it felt like there was no one really there working with teenagers and working with Gen Z to get their perspective and how they could help, because obviously we are the future and we're going to help shape the world around us.
Let's talk for a minute about Gen Z. At the moment when the event happens, what was the talk among you and your friends? Like, how did your friends at school, how did they react to it? Did they experience a similar shock to yours?
I think they definitely experienced shock, but I think just knowing that my grandma could have been murdered and that my grandfather's hospice nurse was shot that day was especially like close to home, and really I think everyone experienced it, but I think knowing that that's where my family is from, it really made me see things in a slightly different light than all my friends.
And then what happens? When do you decide, as we said before, to do something about it?
So I decide kind of after that Thanksgiving, I decide something has to be done because no one's helping teenagers, and teenagers I guess, need to help themselves. And I created Gen Z Jews.
What grade were you in at the time?
At that time, I was in 8th grade, and now I'm in 11th. So far, this has been a 3-year journey. And I created it, and it was a slow start. It took a while for us to build relationships and win funding awards. And
did you do it? Did you do
really
it
create a network?
Did you had a few friends join you? Like how does one go about this? I mean, I know a lot of responsible adults who don't know how to navigate this world. And here comes Zack Singerman in the 8th grade, middle school, and decides that he needs to do something about anti-Semitism. What do you do, Zack? What's the first step you did? The first thing you did, what was it?
So the very first thing I did was ask Barry Weiss to speak at a summit with me. And I found out that she was going to be speaking at the 6th and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C. in August of 2019, I believe. And I listened to her talk about at that time, her new book. At the very end, I went up to her and asked if she would want to be part of this organization and just like speak at the summit. And she got back to me right away and said yes. And over the next few months, I planned out and got people to sign up for this summit that we were going to have on March of 2020. And it was kind of going to be a jumpstart point, like a lift off for Gen Z Jews.
So Gen Z Jews, the first event was with author and journalist Barry Weiss, whom we know well with her book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism. But I want to go back to the first moment when you decide to create Gen Z Jews. What did you do? Did you tell your parents? Did you go to your administrators? How did you even begin to talk about this? What was the first step you actually took in the direction of the creation of Gen Z Jews?
I think that very first step was just research. Just obviously, like, I talked to my mother about it, and she was on board with me the entire way. But the main step was really just research. Because
what was her reaction and your teacher's reaction and your classmates' reaction to this initiative when you came forth and probably shared with them, your vision and what you're doing?
My mother was, as a Jewish mother, super proud always. And my teachers, they obviously were supportive, and they were like, yes, you're going to like do great things that a teacher would say.
I think you are.
Thank you. And my friends, being teenagers and not really caring about much, they're like, yeah, cool. Yeah, nice. I'll help if you want.
So here is the key here, and I'm sure many of our viewers are wondering, what's the secret sauce for the creation of caring, the way we're seeing with you, Zack? You're right. Many teenagers, and by the way, not just teenagers, many young adults, and other people from, all parts of the community, maybe complain, maybe not. Few are those who do. I mean, the number grows daily, but we still need more. What's the secret sauce that made you what you are? You said yourself that, you grew up Jewish, not too Jewish, not extremely aware of being Jewish, and then something like this happened. But there must have been seeds there before that took you to where you are.
I feel like the biggest thing is just education. I started off with research, learning about anti-Semitism, and my goal throughout my entire time as the founder of Gen Z Jews has been just to educate teenagers and other Gen Z members about what anti-Semitism really is. Because if you can find anti-Semitism in your daily life and you can root it out, then you can stop anti-Semitism, or at least slow it down.
And the efforts to educate, your classmates, other Gen Zs, what did it look like, and what was the reaction from people, from your classmates, from others? Were they interested in what you had to offer, in attending the events you created and listening to your messages? How did that dynamics work?
Throughout the past few years, I've done 2 summits, the one with Barry Weiss and then my winter speaker series where I interviewed 4 incredibly gifted people. And I've also had this Learning from Leaders series where I've talked to a bunch of different Jewish leaders and elected officials, Olympians, about Jewishness, anti-Semitism, and Israel. And my friends, they kind of, and other Gen Z members, they kind of all like saw that I was doing these things, and they start watching these videos. They start understanding more about anti-Semitism. And I go to camp all the way across the country, like in California, because I'm in Washington, D.C. And some of those friends now...
Where do you go to camp?
Oh, I go to Camp Alonim in Simi Valley, next to the Brandeis Bardeen Center.
I love Camp Alonim, one of my favorites, yeah.
And now even they're following my Instagram account. They're getting like these almost daily updates that anti-Semitism is out there. This is how we can fight anti-Semitism. This is how you can spot it. This is how you can stop it. And
I want to say something here. How do you know? Where do you get your information? You're doing amazing research, and I just want to share with our viewers that it was beautiful to see that Zack himself is the one who took the initiative to reach out to me and expose me to his work with Gen Z Jews, and see what can be done together to inspire, to educate, to empower public discourse on this important issue, which I love. I mean, initiative to me is incredible. Kudos to you, and that's terrific that you're doing it. Where do you get the information? Like when you go and you educate, where do you go?
When I educate, it's either through these speakers who I have, and they are just boatloads of information, and just like, it's incredible to just hear them speak about what they know and just spread like hours of information and just teach. And then also I get my information from other groups that are fighting anti-Semitism, like Combat Anti-Semitism, ADL, AJC, all these different places that really do, like, that have the resources to understand these statistics and find all these videos and just really get all this information. And then I can take that and give that to my audience who can then learn.
Zack, your generation, the Gen Zs, you know, you grow up in an age where there is an understanding for individual rights. When you have, how do you identify as he or she or they or binary or non-binary? There is such diversity and respect for diversity out there. You know, there seems to be a much more tolerance, or supposedly much more tolerance. And yet the fact is, and it's a sad fact, that anti-Semitism is not receiving its worthy place in this, you know, sphere of hatred. It's like, it always seems to be a knee-jerk reaction to not allow anti-Semitism to stand on its own. It always has to come with other forms of hatred or racism, etc., etc. And there is a lack of recognition of the uniqueness of this phenomenon. The fact that this kind of hatred and anti-Semitism itself has accompanied the human race for thousands of years, taking its toll on millions and millions of people over the generations. How does that relate to your generation's experience? Like, are you surprised that anti-Semitism is not receiving its appropriate place, that is not being treated seriously like other forms of hatred, or do you see it in any other way?
I think that Barry Weiss put this really well. In today's world, you see these things like homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, things like that, where it's like this thing and then phobic. And you know that that is bad. But then you see something like Antifa, which some people like, some people don't like. But when you just hear like anti-fascist, that's good. Like, I don't like fascists. I want to be anti-fascist. So then you hear anti-Semite, it kind of goes in that group of, oh, well, I don't like Semites, then I want to be anti-Semite. These people aren't Semite phobic, they're anti-Semites. So it's kind of like how it's been put together in society. It's almost like it's been coded into people's brains to be like, anti-Semites are good because they're anti-something. They're not phobic of something. If that made sense.
Well, it's in this crazy world of ours, when you look out the window and you hear of anti-Semitic incidents on a daily basis, it is mind-boggling that decent people, people whom otherwise you'd perceive as, anti-Semitism comes, from the supremacist white. It also comes from the left. We've seen members of Congress, people like Ilhan Omar, who tweets about the Benjamins, many a time. Congresswoman like Rashida Tlaib, who uses old blood libels against Israel. That's also sheerly anti-Semitic. So at the same time, your generation is unique in the sense that you live in an age where there is supposedly respect for the individual, and yet when it comes to the Jewish people, that respect somehow dissipates into thin air. And I'm just wondering, when you try to educate others who are less familiar with the topic, how do they react to the information you present them with? Are they surprised? Do they support? What kind of reactions have you gotten?
At this point, I haven't been able to really get out to many non-Jewish audiences yet, but to the audiences that I have, they're kind of surprised, like, oh, that's anti-Semitic. I never thought about it that way. Or like, oh, okay, I see that now. I can spot it. I can stop it. Like, super simple things, just like the idea that Jews are money hungry. That's obviously anti-Semitic. That's been an anti-Semitic trope for hundreds of thousands of years. Like, you look at a Shakespeare play in The Merchant of Venice. It's about a Jew with a big nose being money. And so you point out these things and people start realizing, like, oh, I can see that now. Now I can use this newfound knowledge and spread that to other people.
So then they become aware, as anti-Semitism has been with us for thousands of years, suddenly they wake up to see things that they were kind of used to looking at and viewing them in a different light, making them more aware and understanding in the need to educate about this. Because once people grow up in this environment, Zach, they grow up to take these anti-Semitic tropes as a reality, and then we end up with terrible instances like the Tree of Life massacre, and sadly, too many more. We've just, on a daily basis, we're hearing about Jews being beaten in the streets. We've seen what happened only a few months ago, even in New York City, in Times Square and elsewhere. So your efforts are definitely appreciated and in place. Let me ask you in conclusion, what is your hope? This is an important question about the hopes for the future, and it even means much more because you, Zach, are the future. So what is your hope for the future for Gen Z Jews, and what do you hope to achieve through your advocacy work?
I think my hope is just really to make people take a stand against anti-Semitism, because you really don't see people doing that nowadays. Maybe you see Jews doing it, but you don't see other people do it, like how they take stands against sexism and misogyny and things like that. And you really need people to take a stand if you're going to get anything done. And so that's really my biggest goal.
And again, you're absolutely right. And the fact is that too many people, even within the Jewish community, but definitely within the general public, are not as aware of the issue. And that's why your efforts are very much well placed. Zach, it was wonderful to have you. And even though we marked the anniversary of the terrible Tree of Life massacre, it is inspirational to see the kind of empowerment that it has created within you and members of your generation that you're leading. Your advocacy and activism is really an inspiration to everyone who listened to us and who is viewing you now. I'd like to thank you and to please keep up the great work and keep us all posted. The mission is of utmost importance. And I think everybody, all of our viewers, appreciate your message of strength and hope in the future leadership of the Jewish people. Thank you so much, Zach, for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me, Shahar.
Sadly, in the year 2021, anti-Semitism has become all too present in our lives. Coming from the right and the left, Jews are again left in the middle, an easy target for all grievances. The American Jewish Committee, AJC, just released its 2021 State of Anti-Semitism in America report. It confirms that hatred of Jews remain a severe problem in the United States. According to its findings, 1 in every 4 Jews, let me repeat that, 1 in every 4 Jews in the United States was a victim of anti-Semitism over the past year alone. 1 in every 4. One other troubling aspect of the report is the perception of anti-Semitism as a problem. While over 80% of American Jews believe anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years, the report found that only 40% of the US general public shares the same view. In addition, the survey found that American adults were far less likely than American Jews to have even heard about violent anti-Semitism. Much needs to be done. We have a problem. And it's not just anti-Semitism itself. It is the public awareness and education. We must do our share in speaking up and speaking out against anti-Semitism, just like Gen Z Jews, established by 11th grader Zack Singerman and others out there. Remember, we must make our voices heard. We can't leave our concern on the living room couch, because you know that once you do so, anti-Semitism is going to be coming to knock on your door. So you might as well rise for action now. As Rabbi Hillel the Wise said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm not for others, what am I? And if not now, then when? I'd like to take a moment to bow our heads and remember the 11 victims of the horrible Tree of Life massacre. Rose Mallinger, 97. Richard Gottfried, 65. Melvin Wax, 87. Joyce Feinberg, 75. Jerry Rabinowitz, 66. Irving Younger, 69. Daniel Stein, 71. Cecil Rosenthal, and David Rosenthal, 59 and 54. Bernice Simon and Sylvan Simon, 84 and 86. Say their names. May their memory be a blessing and their soul be bound in the bond of life. Amen.
Amen.
I'd like to thank you all for watching, and to all I say stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay active. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, see you soon. Shalom and להתראות.